I'm back with 5 more questions that people always ask me about what it's like to live on a boat. So here goes. Hi everyone, I'm Rosie Blythe. I'm the author of the Princess Guide to Life book series, and on this channel we talk about everything, literally everything. But because I have lived on a boat now for 8 years, stuff about boat life tends to creep in, and I thought it would be fun to answer some of the questions that people always ask me all the time, like every day. So something that comes up surprisingly often is the question, is it like being on holiday? And I can categorically say no, it is not like being on holiday. Now I can see why people might think this, because if you're taking a leisurely stroll along the canal and you see someone cruising by on their narrowboat, you know, maybe it's a summer evening, maybe they've got a beer while they're just casually steering, maybe they've got like a little cat sitting on the roof, maybe they've got a dog panting happily, watching the world go by. Maybe you see them mooring up and then just like getting their deck chairs out and being like, oh, isn't this nice? We just choose wherever we want to stop and then we just live there. When that's the only part of boat life that you actually see, I can understand why you would think it's like being on holiday, because yeah, it seems like a really relaxed, leisurely way of life. And also, obviously people do it as a holiday. There are canal boat holidays where you hire a boat and you get to stay in the little cabins. It's almost like a camping holiday, except you don't have to camp. And I think it's quite a popular like stag do or hen do thing now. Just like, yeah, we're going to cruise along, we're going to drink, we're going to see London or whatever. So obviously it is like a popular kind of entertainment for people. Like, yeah, let's hire a boat, that seems fun. But it's not like you're cruising around the Med in a yacht, really, is it? I'm on the Grand Union Canal. It's not glam, really. But it is not like a holiday for me, generally, because I'm living my ordinary life. And it's a bit like when someone takes a trip to a really popular tourist spot and they're like talking to the locals like, wow, you live here. It must be like being on a holiday all the time. And it's like, well, you know, there are bonuses. You get really nice scenery or whatever if you're, you know, living in the Swiss Alps or something. But you've still got to do your ordinary life. So for me, living on a boat, there are definitely some benefits to it. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. But, you know, there are drawbacks too. And I think I'm pretty honest and straightforward about that in my videos, and there will be more to come too. So when you live on a boat, the reality is you're doing everything that everyone else does. So making a living, cooking and cleaning and entertaining yourself when you're not working. But you're doing it with a sort of a limited home. So for instance, you've always got to be thinking about how much power you're using. This is maybe not if you're living in a marina and you can hook yourself up to their regular power and you can just use it as much as you like. But for me as a continuous cruiser, because my power comes from solar panels, and if that's not enough, then I need to run the engine to charge the batteries to give myself power. So you're always kind of thinking about just rationing your power that little bit, especially in winter. Like in summer, it's not so much because you get so much power from the solar. But in winter, it's like, well, I don't really want to run my engine all day, so I'm going to run it for an hour or two. But I know some people who do just run it all day long. So I guess in a way, it is a bit like being on holiday. It's like having an RV or something and going camping by the lake. That sounds really nice, doesn't it? But like, you don't have all of the mod cons and creature comforts that you would living in a house or a flat in general. Obviously not all houses are the same. You have to kind of make do a bit more.
When you're limited to what your boat can store rather than being hooked up to the mains when it comes to things like gas or water, it just means you have to be mindful when you're, say, taking a shower or cooking, because when you run out of water or use up your last gas tank, you're going to have to go without until you can refill. So you always have to be one step ahead and make sure you have a backup supply, a spare gas tank that you replace before you forget that you've used up the first, maybe a spare container of water. So it's a lot less relaxing than having these things literally on tap. But it's all doable with a little bit of forward planning.
And then like in the winter, you've got to make sure that you're warm enough, so you've got to build the fire. And again, people do that for fun on holiday. It's not as much fun when you have to do it, just to, you know, cultivate some heat so that you won't freeze in your own home. So there's a lot that's extra on top of your everyday life. You know, I have to empty my toilet. I have to make sure I don't use water too wildly, because I've got to make sure that I can get to the water tap and refill my tank. You're always having to think about it. So it's not as easy as just living in a house. It's not like being on holiday because you're not just like, yeah, relaxing, having fun. You know, you're trying to live your everyday life, but with a slightly less convenient home to do it in. But I will say that the one thing that is a bit like being on holiday is when you arrive in a new place. And I've been doing this for a while now, so I kind of, and I'm quite boring, so I just do the same stretch essentially up and down. So I pretty much always stop in the same places. But the first year or so that I was doing it, every place I stopped, once I'd got out of my sort of hometown, was new. So that was like, it was really cool because you just, you know, you'd moor up and you'd be like, right, I'm going to go explore. I'm going to see where my local shops are and, you know, what is there around here? Is there a park I can walk in and all that kind of stuff. So that does remind me of when you arrive at a holiday place and you kind of arrive in your little hotel room or your little apartment or whatever. And then you kind of go, oh, let's go and explore. Let's go and buy food and bring it back here and all that kind of stuff. So you can definitely like pretend you're on holiday. So that's kind of fun. And even when I'm coming back to places that I do know, it's just nice. You're like, oh yeah, haven't been here for a while. Let's see how, you know, has anything changed? Oh, I've got my favourite supermarket that I go to in this area and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I guess it's all about attitude. And I do try to remember if I'm like, ugh, I've got to move the boat today, what pain. I do try to remind myself, like, people go on holiday to do that. People pay money for the fun of moving a boat. So be grateful, young lady. So yeah, I do have to have a word with myself sometimes. What happens if you don't move on when you are supposed to? So if you're not familiar with this, if you have a continuous cruiser license, you are supposed to move on every 2 weeks. And the CRT, Canal River Trust, are, I think, deliberately vague about how far you have to move. I don't think there is a strict rule, and anyone you ask will be like, a mile or two, a couple of locks, which are two different things, by the way. I think on their website it says something like, in a year's time you have to move 20 miles in one direction. So you can't zigzag back and forth, basically. You have to prove that you've moved in one direction for that amount. So I tend to move, I think I've said before, I move about a mile or so at a time because then it's easier to walk back with my car. So I've kind of got my routine, and I sometimes get in trouble with the CRT because I am a bit lazy and I do sometimes spend a lot more time in a place than I meant to. And it's funny because people are like, oh, it's not like they check, is it? And I'm like, yeah, they do. They basically have somebody, a bit like a traffic warden, walking up and down, registering where your boat is. If they come back like 2.5 weeks later and you're still in the same place, they know that you've overstayed your 2-week limit. So first of all, you will get an email and it will just say like, we've noticed you haven't moved far enough or fast enough. If you've already moved, don't worry about it, but you know, keep moving, go on. That's it. If you continue to be naughty, they will, when it comes time for you to renew your license, which is, I think, about a couple of months before it actually runs out, I think you get the first email kind of offering you the early bird special. They will say, we're going to limit you now. Instead of being able to buy a 1-year license, you're going to have to stick to a 6-month license. The good thing about that is that it's the same price, pro rata. Also, they claim. Other boaters have been like, no, it's not. I'm pretty sure it is, though. I think the CRT is quite clear. So then in that 6 months, you only have to cover 10 miles. And some people might find that easier. It's a shorter amount of time. It sort of focuses your mind. You're like, okay, 6 months, 10 miles, I can do that. If you ignore that, I don't know what happens. You can tell what stage of naughtiness I've been to. I'm not quite sure what happens after that. I think they would probably continue to put you on 6-month licenses. And I think if you just keep ignoring them, they would end up trying to take you to court. I think the big fear for boaters is that they would take your boat away from you. You know, they'd squeak it out. I think it would have to get pretty bad before that point. And I think you'd probably be given a chance to defend your reasons. Physical health or mental health or whatever circumstances had led you to not be able to move on every 2 weeks. I think they would be made to give you a chance. So I think you'd have to be pretty bad. But it's weird because sometimes you'll meet people and they'll be like, yeah, I've been in the same place for ages. I'm on a continuous cruiser license, and no one ever says anything. So I don't know how. Some people do seem to slip through the net. It's very strange. CRT is obviously not a perfect system. I don't really know why they don't just put a tracker on everyone's boat, because I think in the end that would be cheaper than sending people walking around. I guess they do that so that they've got people walking around patrolling to see if there are any other issues. But considering the number of holes and things in the bank where people could very easily trip and break an ankle, they don't see it. Like, what's the point anyway? Third question, which it probably actually comes up much more often, is how much does it cost? I have made an entire video, I've had like a series of videos because it was meant to be one and it was like an hour long, so I split it into 3. So I did the 7-year point. I was like, okay, how much have I spent on the boat over 7 years? And I think it worked out on average about £6 a year. That included the initial purchase of the boat. So thinking about it that way, it's pretty good value. But I will say sometimes you will have expensive years. I had a horrendously expensive year when I think it was about 5 years in, or maybe 6 years in, where it was like time to get a survey on the boat's hull, which the insurance companies will ask you to do every so often so that they know what they're insuring, because obviously the hull, you can't see it. You don't know what sort of damage or wear and tear is happening. So yeah, I needed quite a lot of work done on my hull, and I think it ended up costing me about 10 grand, which was awful. But you know, it does over the years average out, because you'll have years where nothing goes wrong and everything's fine and you just live in your boat and you're just happy. But yeah, you will end up spending money on it over the years, depending on, you know, the kind of boat that you get. If you buy a decrepit old, I mean, my boat's 1977, so it's pretty old. So if you buy a newer boat, you probably won't have as many repairs and things to do, but things do just kind of need to be replaced as you go along. So you do have to kind of consider that when you buy a boat. That's not going to be the final price. But just think of it in terms of like initial purchase, insurance. I think mine is, I think it's something like 200 and something a year, so it's not very high insurance. License fees on my boat, 57 foot, it's about 1,000 a year. I'm not quite sure, I can't remember now. So if you want to know a detailed breakdown, I will link my other videos below, because it does vary wildly, and somebody who's been on a boat for 2 years may have a very different idea of how much it costs compared with someone who's been on their boat for 20 years, because you get more of an idea of what needs replacing at what time and all that kind of stuff. Something people often ask is, do you have to pay council tax? And the answer is no, because I guess the licence fee that you pay to the Canal River Trust is kind of the equivalent of council tax, but it's almost like people who live on the canal, it's like we live separately from everyone else. So it's like, oh well, you stay on the canal, so all of your fees that you have to pay for living just get paid to the Canal River Trust. So it is kind of weird, because obviously we are members of society, but it's almost like we're just treated as separate beings. So yeah, we don't pay council tax. Strange but true. So something people often ask is, do you work and can you have high-speed internet on your boat? And the do you work thing is quite interesting, because I haven't had this, but other boaters have said to me that people have said like, oh, you obviously don't work living on a boat. And they're like, yes, I do. And it's funny because it can be harder, because obviously like if you are on a continuous cruiser license and you're moving all the time and you have to, you know, span at least 20 miles in your year, if you go to a place of work, that gets tricky, because like sometimes you might be really nearby and it might just be like, oh, I just walk across this field and I'm at work. Other times you might be like an hour's train ride away or more. So yeah, it can be difficult to hold down a regular kind of job. And also if you're working, you know, long shifts and stuff, it can be difficult, because boaters, we do say that having a boat is like having a part-time job. Like the amount of maintenance and just everyday stuff that you need to do, it is just more than living in a house. You know, you're emptying your toilet and you're setting aside a time to move the boat and to fill your water tank and all that kind of stuff. Coming back to things being slightly more difficult and not being like a holiday. In a house, you know, you just put your rubbish in the bin, and then on the day that the bin men come round, you put your bins out and that's it. On a boat, you've got to sort of think about, there are only bins in certain places, so you have to kind of wait until you're passing them, or take them somewhere with you and put them in the bins. So it's not as easy as just like you dump stuff outside and someone takes it away for you. But you certainly have people doing regular 9-to-5 jobs who live on boats. I think there are quite a wide variety of kinds of boaters. You'll see people leaving in the morning in their suit to go off and work in the city or whatever. I will say though, I have noticed a lot of people don't seem to work. But, you know, you sort of like, you walk, every time you walk past, they're out there just fishing or whatever, or just like sitting around. And sometimes they're retired, but sometimes it is like young, seemingly able-bodied people. So I don't know how that works. Yeah, I don't know. But they probably think the same about me because they see me just like leisurely walking my dog around. I'm self-employed, so I work from home. And this is where the high-speed internet thing comes in, because obviously a lot of people do work from home now. So people might see you going into your boat and never coming out and assume that you don't work. It may be that you just like you're on Teams calls all day. So high-speed internet, it is tricky because it can sometimes depend on the area that you're in. You've got a few options. You could have a dongle, or what I have, it's called a MiFi. So this is my current internet setup. It's a little TP-Link MiFi. So it's just you plug it in with USB. I've had a couple of different ones. They're all pretty much the same. I think I started out with Vodafone, and they provided me with the little, the little gadget. And then I think I switched to Smarty because I realised it was cheaper to just buy a data-only SIM and put it in. When you do that, sometimes it can be tricky because they're expecting you to put it in a phone, so sometimes they might send you a text to that number, which you can just take the SIM out of your phone and put the SIM from your MiFi into the phone and to receive text or to confirm stuff, which can be a bit of a faff obviously, but it's doable. I've gone through a few different MiFi gadgets and a few different suppliers of the internet. So I did have a Smarty SIM card at one point, and I think they're with 3. That wasn't so great. It was all right, but I ended up switching to a Like a Mobile one, which is on EE, which seems better, but still not perfect. So the MiFi, it's essentially like a dongle, except you can run your laptop and your phone and sort of multiple devices off it.
Also, I forgot to say, some people don't bother with the MiFi, they just use their phone as a hotspot. So you have a few different options.
I have had some frustration with my internet not working very well, which is incredibly annoying, as you can imagine. Sometimes it'll be okay on my phone, but not the laptop, so I think it's like a strength of signal and like what's on my laptop maybe taking up too much power kind of issue. And sometimes you'll think it's just you, and then you'll talk to another boater down the road and they're like, wow, the signal's really bad in this area, isn't it? And you're like, oh, it's not just me, okay. I guess, if you live somewhere a little bit remote, you might get the same in a house or a flat. But definitely boaters, you sort of have to keep trying until you hit on the particular formula of which supplier works best for you in the stretch that you go along, because obviously different internet providers have different masts everywhere. Sometimes you'll just be in the middle of editing a video and then obviously the connection just drops and the software's like, no, there's no internet connection, sorry. So that's very annoying. So the answer is yes, you can have high-speed internet, but in my experience it doesn't always work perfectly. So that is my latest 5 questions that people always ask me. There will be more of these videos because I'm starting to think of more and more questions that people always ask, so do tune into those in future. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. Thank you for liking it, thank you for subscribing to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye!